This is Mark Abel with the local Buffalo Writers series. Today I am here with Kerry Sara. He is a freelance writer who is about to release a novel with a local publishing house called Halep versus Holm. Tell us about your experiences as a veteran.
I joined the Army National Guard in 1990. A couple of years out of high school, I started working, odd jobs first. And then I eventually was sort of, not having any direction. Went into the military just to sort of get a sense of myself, which is what a lot of people do. Liked it. However, immediately after basic training, my unit, which was a military police unit in Buffalo, New York, was activated for the first Iraq War. And I was sent overseas. And we were not a combat unit, but we took prisoners. Did not see any action, any live fire action, but definitely saw the after effects of war on the prisoners that we took, as well as some of the civilians. A lot of death and destruction in the places that we either carpet bombed or did our units did assaults on. So that had an effect on me.
And you developed PTSD symptoms as a result of the Gulf War?
Yes, but there again, I didn't really quote unquote feel it at first. I think coming from I come from a poor background, and unfortunately, what I found, I was trained in college as a social scientist. So applying my social science skills to my own experience, what I find is that people very rarely, the concept of the American dream, people very rarely realize that concept. People tend to stay in their own social class, i.e., if you're poor, you tend to stay poor. If you're middle class, you tend to stay middle class. If you're rich, you tend to stay rich. So I very much, especially in the Army, I very much became a person who believed in America and the concept of American dream. But I found social circumstances sort of kept me over time in the poor and underclass of society. And that sort of attributed a lot to the post-traumatic stress that I've experienced, as well as sort of like the mental illness aspects of thinking something is wrong with me, why can't I be successful, etc. So if that makes any sense.
And the two main characters in your novel, Halep versus Holm, one is secular and one is the fundamentalist, and it's meant to be representative of the broader society. Can you elaborate on that more?
Yes, I would say that the antagonist, his name is Shaib al-Assad. He's a Iraqi Kurd from Iraqi Kurdistan. He's not truly a secularist at heart. He is a Muslim, a Shiite Muslim. He believes in his religion. He's very attached to his family, but he is a graduate student going to school in Manhattan at Columbia University. So he's very much, for the first time, outside of his culture and his comfort zone. So he's experimenting with what secular Western society has to offer. And so he is very much going out, drinking, doing a nightclub scene, which Muslims are not supposed to do. He's very much dating multiple women, which Muslims are not supposed to do. So he's experimenting, but the story is told through his letters back home to his family, his personal journal entries, newspaper articles, web-based articles. So through that story, he's sort of figuring himself out. The antagonist is his name is Constantine Stoyan. He is a immigrant from Romania. However, he has been in the U.S. for a number of years. He immigrated in the early 90s after the Berlin Wall fell and the former Soviet states became westernized. He immigrated to America, became indoctrinated into America, very much is pro-American. At the time of the story, he is a conservative, very much pro-Trump. The story is set during the end of the presidential election in 2016 and the aftermath of President Donald Trump win in November of 2016. So he is writing, he's a college professor, he's also an amateur journalist, and he is also in graduate school at the Columbia University School of Journalism. So he is writing stories in support of the so-called Trump revolution, and that's where the conflict stems from. Scheidel, as a sort of modern and moderate Muslim, who is very much against the rhetoric that is coming out of the Trump wing of the Conservative Party against immigration and against Islam, versus Constantine, who is a right-wing conservative who is very much in favor of protecting America's borders from immigration and the threat of radicalism and Islam in general.
So at one point you wrote some articles for some right-wing publications, but you've since been developing more of a new political identity. What's shaped some of your newer views surrounding the political realm?
Well, I should start back when I was indoctrinated into the military. I very much became a conservative. It actually starts before that. I was raised as a Muslim, an American Muslim. The environment that I was raised in was not a very good or healthy one. A lot of abuse of across the spectrum of abuse you can imagine. Physical, emotional, sexual, substance abuse within the adults of the family and the community. So I escaped, fortunately, when I was a young teenager. Went to live with my grandmother, who was a very devout Christian. That had an influence on me. Living in her house, I had a lot of freedom to sort of figure out who it is that I thought I was. And so for some reason, during that, I grew up as a teenager in the early or the mid 1980s. So around 84, 85, 86 is when I escaped my home environment, went to live with my grandmother. That is during the height of the Reagan Revolution. I very much became enamored with everything that was going on with the conservative movement at that point. Very much became pro-Reagan, pro-military. Did not go to the military right after I graduated high school in 1988 because I sort of wanted to get a sense of working out in the real world. But a couple of years later, I finally went into the military, and that sort of stoked my sense of patriotism, sense of pride in America, pride in the military. I felt like a real person, I was a military man. I had money in my pocket. Once I came back after we were deactivated from the first Iraq War, Desert Shield, Desert Storm, I immediately got a job, immediately enrolled in school full time. So I was like feeling like a real productive person. So many of my friends in college and at work, I was working out in the suburbs in Williamsville. So many of my friends were conservatives, white, young, conservative, come from conservative families. Families had money. So that's sort of who I became in my head, I would say. Maybe my reality, my social and economic realities didn't match how I saw myself or who I saw myself as a young adult.